Welcome back to the channel, everybody. This is part 2 of the Airbus A340-600 from Tolis. And in the previous episode, we covered the complete cold and dark procedures as an airline pilot, as an Airbus pilot. We went through some of our flows with the upper overhead panel, the cockpit setup. We also imported the flight plan. We got our performance numbers in there, and we have done our very first checklist, which was the cockpit preparation checklist. And now at this point, we are ready to start the APU and get the aircraft ready and out of the chocks here. So the very first thing, let's come to the upper overhead panel. And what we're going to do is we're going to hit the master switch. And you just want to wait literally like 1, 2, 3 seconds or so, because it's going through a self-start sequence or testing. It's called the bit. And we'll hit start. And then what we want to do is we can come down to here, and that's exactly what you want to see there is the APU page automatically comes up, flap opens after about 10, 15 seconds, and then you should see the APU start to fire up. And what we're seeing is a rise in EGT and the N1 speed. So we'll wait for that to fire up. And at that point, we are probably ready. Once again, in the real world, at this point, I've started the APU. It's about 25 minutes prior to departure. And at this point, I'm actually waiting for my ground crew to come up. They're going to be bringing my load sheet for all the bags, the passenger count. The flight attendant will come in. We'll review the passenger count to make sure both sets of numbers are working correctly, because we actually have to input them into the MCDU for us to get our weight and balance numbers. But we've already were able to skip that in the very first episode and get straight to the performance numbers, so we didn't have to wait. So at this point, we've got the APU up and ready to go, and we can, at this point, probably just pull off the chocks there. And so we will go to ground services. And now that we have the APU up and running, the procedure is, may not matter in this aircraft, but in the real world, you want to turn off your external power first before you pull it, the shore power. I've had, in the real world, once again, I've had the go completely dead as the it just can't handle the do that sequence. So there we'll go from, we'll take the external power off, A and B, and then we can go ahead and remove the chocks. And while we're here, we can have the pushback if you're not using GSX. I think I mentioned it in the first part of the video. I have seen people use GSX. I personally have had some issues with it in terms of, for instance, you see these aircraft doors are in the auto position. I've tried to open them up. If you ever call for catering, it'll sit there and beep at you as it tells you, open up 1R. And as soon as I open it up, the aircraft literally crashes. So I have not been able to get GSX to work. Luckily, we can do our own pushback here. The nice thing is that you can control the distance of how far you would like it to push back and the direction. So I'm just going to bring it up to about, I don't know, at 110. And then at this point, we can do the start auto pushback. But before that, what we'd want to do in the real world is we turn our beacon on to the on position as I drag it. That lets the ground crew know that we're ready to go. And at that point, they jump onto the radio with us, and they will tell us that the walk around's complete, bypass pin is inserted, and we are clear to release brakes. So at that point, I will just take the brakes off, and let's come back to here, and I will start the pushback. And you see that abort pushback, so it's doing its thing. We'll look here, and what you should see here is the nose raises up a little bit as it simulates that the tug has picked it up, and then it should start pushing. There we go. And then it should start pushing back. For us, I think a nice straight pushback is going to work fine. Obviously, in the real world, we'd also be making a call to ramp control, at least at most airports, to get permission to push. There are some airports here, for instance, like Orlando, do not need permission to push at all. You just do whatever you feel like doing. There's actually a lot of airports that are like that because the ramp is technically uncontrolled. Pretty much do whatever you want. And I learned that lesson as I was in the regional, and we'd made some mistake and gone the wrong way, and I was all kind of stressed out. The captain literally said, "We're on the ramp. Relax." So, uh, so we'll just go ahead and get pushed out here. Normally, as this is happening, they're going to tell us that we can go ahead and start our engines in sequence. But we'll just wait till this push is complete before we will get going. All right, so it's come to a stop there. We can go ahead and put our parking brake on. Once again, I'm using the Wind Control Pack 32, so I can just reach over and get that done. It lowers it out. And then at this point, what we would normally do is we would run the before starting engine checklist. We'd actually do that before we actually pushed off the gate. And the reason I haven't is because I do think we have a little bit of a simism, or there's quite frankly a difference in the checklist. So the very first thing I'm going to ask for, I'll say, let's run the before start checklist. And as I put up on the screen there, as you see it, the response is PEDs, which are then both people will say set, beacon, I'll say on, nose wheel steering disconnect. And this is where our very first kind of, either it's a simism or it just doesn't exist in the 340, which I would find is a little bit strange. But right there, below parking brake, TCAS standby, and APU available, you should see a nose wheel steering disconnect in green before you start moving. And the reason is if the nose wheel steering is not disconnected and they disconnect it by inserting a bypass pin, what can happen is if I move the rudder or if I move the tiller, that is going to swing that tow bar, and you can literally break legs. You could kill people literally with that thing. So I'm surprised with this kind of Airbus architecture. You're going to see this in the 320 in that spot right there. Also, you're going to see down below that in the door page that we have, none of the doors are actually armed. If we come over to here, you can see it's grayed out. It's going to do that automatically. You would do that prior to push. Now, I believe the sim, those will go ahead and arm up as we start to taxi out. But so that's the reason I didn't normally run that checklist. So, because the next one after nose wheel steering disconnect is going to be windows, doors, and slide. And then you would literally give, if I go to here, I'm just going to pan over here really. You would tug on your window to make sure it's closed. I have had one time in 6 years, I went to tug and the window just opened right up. So that would have been really exciting at about right after we took off as that window slid open. And then you'd look at the door page and you confirm that all the slides were in the arm position. And then takeoff data, come down the MICDO. What you're going to want to have is pilot flying. We'll always have the takeoff data here. Pilot monitoring will always have the flight plan up. And then cockpit door is closed and locked. So at that point, we are now ready to start the engine. So the engine starting sequence is actually pretty simple on this aircraft. What we're going to want to do is, the very first thing is we're going to come down. Let me change the view for you all. And the very first thing you want to do is just go ahead and turn your igniter to the start position. It takes a couple seconds. There you go. See what everything was magenta, orange, and then went back to green. Give it a second before you try to start the engines. It's all the FADECs getting themselves set and ready to go. So at this point, we're just going to start number one, which is the same in an Airbus 340 or a 320. So we'll start. And at this point, we are looking at an N2 of about 10% before we can start the next engine. So let's come over here so we can. Oh, there we go. That's a great thing because I'm yippity-yapping talking. So let's go ahead and abort the start sequence. We'll take that off. And what we saw is low pressure because you know what I forgot to do while I was talking? I did not turn on the APU bleed. I feel kind of stupid, but I'm glad you guys got to see that. The aircraft will not start without the pneumatics, the APU pneumatics going. All right, so let's do that again. Has that ever happened to me in the real world? Yes, it has. And that's how you learn. All right, so once again, we'll start one. We'll zoom in here, and now we're looking at for an N2 of about 10% before we can start the next engine. Right now, we're just monitoring temps. These are self-starting engines, as you see with the ECAM we had right there. If there's a problem, it will, if we have an abort, if it gets too hot, it'll just reset itself. There'll be an ECAM will pop up. We'll announce ECAM actions, and then it'll go through, fail to start, and then it will literally, the ECAM will probably tell us just to, at that stage, to continue with the start. All right, anyway, so we're looking for N2 of 10%. We already see we're at 33. That's the N2 is going to be in the lower screen, the very top line. So we can go ahead and start number 2. And if you look at the very top there, available, it means engine 1 has done its complete start sequence. And as we come up on 10% here, we'll go ahead and start engine 3. And if you guys, I'll just real quickly as it's starting up, if you guys, right below these engine switches, there is a black button where we saw the fire come out. If you have the wind control pack 32, the throttle quadrant, those are actual buttons, and they're not assigned to anything. So I just assigned those buttons to engines 3 and 4 under the 1 and 2 on the pack 32. Anyways, that's how we do that. Once again, I think there's a lot of videos out on that. At this point, we're now just waiting for our final engine to go to available. You hear that trip? That's the ground connector there, and this is the GCU trip. And once we hit once we get available, we're going to go ahead and start our timer. And the reason is we want at least 3 minutes before we depart, in case we have a very short taxi. All right, so now we can do the after start, which is exactly what I'll call for. I'll call for the after start checklist, which is the FO's time to do his after start flow. And we're going to start from the very top. It's very organized. We're going to come to the APU bleed. We're going to turn that off. And then we're going to come to the APU master, and we're going to turn that off. Don't need it. And we're going to come down to here. And now it's a little bit different here, but we're just going to turn on our chip or our weather radar. As I think I mentioned earlier, it will automatically set the trim for you, which was 2.6. You see it went from 3 to 2.6, so that's the nice thing. You don't have to manipulate that. From here, we're going to come straight down. Once again, I have the pack 32, so I'll just pull up. We're going to put the spoilers on. We are going to turn the igniters off. We are going to set the flaps to 1. And while we're here, because this aircraft I don't think has a persistent state, we're going to put the transponder into on. We can move the number 1 for the pilot flying. We want it in all or above, and then we want that into TARA. And then that completes the after start flow. And now we do the after start checklist, which is going to be anti-ice. And in this instance, it's going to be off. And the reason is whenever we use anti-ice on the ground, it's going to be 10 degrees Celsius or less and visible moisture, which we have none of today. The next thing is going to be rudder trim. Now, I didn't do it because I think it's probably at 0 here, but let's look at the engine pedal and pedestal, and then right down here is our rudder trim. You see it's already at 0. If it wasn't, sometimes when you're sitting on the ground, it moves. You just hold that button and it'll auto 0 to you. So rudder trim is neutral, pitch trim 2.6 up is set, and ECAM status. We will, we see it right there, is if we had any kind of maintenance issues, you would see, or if there was any emergencies or anything that was going on that was not set correctly, you would see a status would be showing. So at this point, after start checklist is complete. All right, so let's go ahead and get out of here. As I said, we are not using the Beyond ATC, so we'll just do our own thing. All right, so let's go ahead and release the parking brake. We will turn on our track IR, and then we will make our left turn out of here. At this stage, as we're taxiing out, I am going to ask for a takeoff briefing from my first officer. And he's just, it's pretty simple. He's going to be, he is going to start off with, and basically, I'll run through it here. I'll probably just have to come to a stop here. Let me get leveled out, straightened out, not leveled out. Get straightened out here. Hop on the brakes a little bit. I'm normally doing this as I'm taxiing. He's going to be doing this, but he is going to tell me that we're going to be departing runway 27 left with the flap setting of 1. We'll be flexing out of here. Packs will be on. Initial altitude is going to be 6,000 feet on the max at 1 departure. We're going to be in nav mode. Our speeds are going to be 154, and 159. And then event of an engine failure, it's going to be straight out departure with a flap retraction altitude of 1090. Have any questions? None. Thank you very much. And now that completes for him the briefing. And once again, for you guys, as I mentioned these things, is because hopefully it will help you, if you know what they are, to in fact get your aircraft set up and ready to go. All right, so we'll give ourselves just a little bit of power so we can get out of here. So once again, I'm hoping all this makes sense for you all, while we're going through all this stuff. Hopefully it'll make your flying a little bit easier. Now, there are some cameras on here, which I do not use, because if you fly it like a 321 and use the exact same visual references, you'll probably be okay. And the important thing to remember, which is probably where people make the most amount of mistakes in the real world and here in the sim, you have to remember that the nose wheel is sitting several feet behind you. So for you to stay on path, just keep in mind it's just behind you. And what I like to use is here on the left, between the front windscreen and the side windscreen, that bar right there. And then if you roll out, and you roll out right between the PFD and the ND, and if you keep that right there, should be pretty much right on center line. Let's take a look. How am I doing? Yep, right on center line. At this point, what we're going to do then is I'll ask him if he's ready for some flight controls. And what's going to happen is I'm just going to come to a stop here. If you look down, be full up, full down, neutral, full left, full right, neutral. And let's see if this actually worked, but you can't really see the tiller here. You have to press down on this button here, which does not work. And then you just give them the full left, full right, and back to neutral. And then once that happens, he will do the exact same thing. He'll go through and check his controls, with the exception of the rudder, since we do that. And then I will ask for the taxi checklist. And here, there's only one extra exception here. I'm just I don't want to go too far here, but you want to come up here. You see the very first one is going to be cabin. Just come up here and hit the purser switch right there. That takes care of the cabin ready. And then what he's going to do is come back down and around, make sure everything is set up correctly, and he will put RTO and then the takeoff config. You have to have that done. And if you want, you can put terrain on if you need to, or any of the weather, any of the overlays you need. And at that point, I will call for the taxi checklist. And the taxi checklist is going to be flight controls, checked, flight instruments. And let's zoom in right here, because what you're actually looking for, as I put the brakes on while I'm not looking, is the airspeeds there, 159, 154, and then 1 FD2. And so the memory mnemonic for everybody is magenta over blue, FD1 and 2, which tells us that our V speeds are in, and the flight directors and everything is all set up. That is in the takeoff position. You can, if you want, as we come up to the FCU, confirm that you have 6,000, or if you're in nav or in heading mode, make sure that's all set. And then ECAM memo, takeoff, no blue, as we look at the ECAM there, and there are no blue indicators. So now the taxi checklist is complete. And as we're coming out to the runway, we are going to call for the before start checklist, and that is going to be brake release fuel. And we're going to say we got 50 brake release fuel. And where do you find brake release fuel? If we come back to the OFP, and I will circle it, but brake release fuel is going to be 53.1. You'll say 53.1. I'm going to say we have 54.2 on board. Takeoff runway. We'll come down and take a look here, and what you should see here is runway 27 left once, and then you should look out and see it on 27 left, the taxiway signs. TCAS is TARA, cabin signal was given. He would say the flight attendants, please prepare for departure, and packs are on. As we mentioned, there are some fairly rare instances where you turn the packs off for performance. So one thing, while I was still doing the Yippee app, I never put our taxi lights on. Let's do that eventually. Have I forgotten that in real life? Yeah, a whole bunch. Matter of fact, that was one of the hardest things going through captain trains, is remember to turn all the lights on, because as an FO, you, at least at our airline, you never do any of that work. That's all captain work. So it took me a while. Luckily, I used to fly a lot at night, and so that really quickly lets you know if you got everything on in the right position. All right, and so as we're making the turn here, if you notice, I'm trying to keep the line kind of between the front wind post and kind of like halfway through the mirror there. That'll work pretty much for the 320 and the 340 here. All right, and as we come up to the runway here, what I'll normally do is at that point then we'll turn on our runway turn-off lights. We'll put our landing lights on, our takeoff lights on, and our wing lights on. So we're now completely lit up and ready to go. And we can go ahead and reset our timer since we have exceeded our 3 minutes. Now, you don't have to stop the aircraft if you don't want to. You can do it right on the roll. That is completely an acceptable technique, but I'm just going to stop. And the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and bring our throttles up to about 50% N1. So we bring her up about 50% there, right there, and we're just looking that they're stabilized. We'll hit our chrono, and then here we'll go ahead and smoothly apply the power. Then we're going to look down at our PFD and read our FMA. So it'll be manned flex 71 SRS runway auto thrust. 80 knots where thrust is set. 100 knots checks. V1, rotate. Positive rate. And then gear is up. And as soon as you put the gear up, nav. I was looking down. As soon as you put the gear up, automatically go ahead and disarm the spoilers. And at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and put autopilot 1 on so it can fly, so I can talk. Normally, I would probably fly up to about 10,000 feet or so. And you see lever climb. So what I'm looking for, look at that airspeed tape. See, it's slightly decreasing in speed. I want to see a positive increase in speed. Got it. Then we'll go back to thrust climb. And now we are just waiting to get to our S speed, which is our flap 0 speed. So we should probably be in 10 knot arc. And then coming up on S speed there, I'm going to say flap 0, speed checks. Flap 0, after takeoff checklist, which will read he will read quietly, which I'll pull up on the screen for you, but it's just going to be, double check that the packs are on. If they were off, you'd have a fault. Landing gear up and flaps are retracted. And then all he just says is after takeoff checklist is complete. So cool. All right, so 5,000 climbing 6, and I let it stay at 6 for a very specific reason here, so I can show you what we want to do. Now, if you notice, we were in, I guess we've already moved into outstar, so we'd be reading that the entire way instead of playing with the nice views, but they are so cool. All right, so we're coming up here on 6,000 feet. So once again, you will see here, the computer is fairly smart in terms of it knows it needs to hold 250 knots below 10,000 feet. If we had anything in that SID, this is a pretty simple SID, just levels us off at 6,000. If we had any speed constraints or altitude constraints, it would do its best to maintain those, and you can check on the MICDO how it's going to, what altitudes it's going to hit, but we'll save that for another episode. This is really a pretty simple and standard SID. Now, let's go ahead and come up to 10,000 feet, and then we have a couple choices. I'm going to go thrust climb, open climb, 6,000 climbing 10. He'll say 10,000 altitude checks. So I made a decision there to go to open climb, and the reason is on this max, it was our top altitude at 6,000, and we had no other constraints in the climb out. But if we had some constraints and we used open climb, that would ignore those constraints. So in that stage, you would put 10,000 and you would push the altitude button. So let's talk a little bit as it's doing this. Speed alt star. If we come to the FCU is set up, flight control unit is really simple. Whenever you would like to do something, you pull it towards you. If you want the airplane to do it, you push it. So for speed, I am holding speed. If I pull on the knob, I've now set a speed and I can manually control that speed. If I want the computer to control the speed based off of the cost index or whatever's in the SID, we're going to push. So the same thing kind of applies to the altitude here. If I simply do, now if you see I've switched, and that is because if we look here, I was just in front of the 10,000 feet, or just before 10,000 feet. So I was in the wrong mode. It immediately switched to vertical speed mode. If you see that, once again, just kind of pull it, and then you'll see thrust climb, open climb, 10,000, climbing 12. All right, so if you would like to use a vertical speed mode, you don't normally use vertical. You can use it. I use it actually a lot. But when you're kind of climbing, you're generally either going to want to be in climb mode. So let's push climb. Now, there are no constraints for us in front of us, but if there was, it would manage those constraints appropriately. Now, we're in Europe, so it has a little bit different for our transition altitude. So for us at this point, we're just going to pull standard. And then we'll say 11,500. And then he'll say 11,500, standard pulled, altitude checks. So I know we're covering a lot of different things, and we're going to continue to reinforce some of these concepts here. But if, let's go ahead and dial in. You see, because it's not in out mode, I was in out star. Whenever I try to change the altitude, it's going to revert to a vertical speed mode. And you may or may not want that. Probably not. But as we're above 10,000 feet, you see we're starting to climb out at 300 knots, and that's because of the cost index I put in there. And as we cross 10,000 feet, as I stop talking, what was it say right there? Wing anti-ice detected. Once again, we are, where are we at? TAT of -8, and we are in visible moisture. That would be a time that you would absolutely, when you get into the clouds there, we'll go ahead and clear that out as we're already passing through there. You would want to come up to your upper panel, and then you would want to put in your, mostly just your engine anti-ice, unless you have actual ice detected. And it looks for the 340. They want us to put us all in. Wing, we'll put it all on. And then we are out of the clouds again. So once again, back to our upper panel. I just want to clear that ECLAM, clear off all the ice. Anyways, as I was saying, once you cross 10,000 feet, you're going to go ahead and turn off your lights. While you're right here, I will ding the flight attendants, let them know we're going through sterile, and I use the wing on off to remind myself, hey, did I actually contact the flight attendants? Because you up here and you're doing stuff and you start to forget. We can also here zoom out a little bit. And 17,000 climbing 18. So we are in out star mode. If I change the altitude, look what happens. We go straight into vertical speed mode. So it's really important. I'm just going to bring us all the way up to 38 because there's really no point doing these intermediate stops for now. So thrust climb, open climb, climbing 380. And then flight level 380 altitude checks. So it's really important, and as we talk about the autopilot, and we'll continue to reinforce this later here. I'm going to pause our track IR, or at least let's go back to the FCU view. What you put into the FCU here may or may not be doing what it may or may not reflect what the aircraft is going to do, right? And so we put in 380, we were in open climb, so you're thinking, oh, okay, great, I'm going to continue that. So just remember, this is what you would like the aircraft to do. What you see on your FMAs, the very top line of your PFD, that's what the aircraft is actually doing. So when I put in, for instance, 380, I've dialed it in there, but I don't read that when I'm looking to tell if my FO is flying and I'm pilot monitoring, I'm not looking what he put into the FCU. I'm looking to confirm we have flight level 380 set in the PFD, and that what we've asked it to do, thrust climb, open climb, alt, it's going to level off at 380. We're in nav mode, autopilot 1, flight directors 1 and 2 on, and auto thrust is on. We don't have to read all that stuff. We just primarily we're only going to read the first 2 categories, thrust climb, open climb, once again until we get above 18,000, and then we just have to read the second column. More baseball, probably more information that you probably need. But if you see me starting to change my callouts, that is exactly why. If we come back here and look at our ND, it's kind of hard to see in the sunlight here, but as you see we're going to, in around 50 miles, that blue hash mark at about 50 miles out, that is telling us where we're going to level off at flight level 380. So I'm throwing a lot of concepts at you guys. I'm sure you guys know some of this stuff, but as we continue to fly this aircraft, and particularly the A320, as I go through, and I'm working up kind of a teaching series on the A320, everything from cold and dark, how to do holds, Cat 2 approaches, Cat 3 approaches, Cat 1, all that kind of stuff, RNAV Zulus. It's just important to understand how the aircraft is going to work. And for the most part, it does a pretty good job. Now, what we can do here is we're coming out at 300 knots, especially when you're behind. It's not uncommon for me to go ahead, and I will go ahead and pull speed, and then I'll just go ahead and manually, let's bring it up to 310 or so. Now, you have to be a little bit careful of that as we continue to climb up, because right around, I wouldn't do it normally this late, and I would probably hold 300. I'm just demonstrating a point. But once you get around 32,000 feet or so is when you get the transition altitude, where you go from speed mode to Mach mode. And in the A320, 300 at around 32,000 feet is going to be Mach 0.80. So if you wanted to, what you can do here is, what I don't want to do is hold like 320, go through the transition altitude, and then be doing Mach 0.83 or something, 84, when the limit's only 0.82. Does that make sense? So the other thing you can do, if you wanted to early, let's come to here. We can go back out. We can hit this button right here that I'm highlighting. We can switch it already to Mach mode, and then I can just dial in Mach 8.0 to hold, and then they'll hold it the entire way up. Like I said, you can get kind of caught up in that transition sometimes. So generally for me, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold 300 knots the entire way, and then as I level off at flight level 360, whatever, 380, as I pass through that transition altitude, it will kind of hold 0.80 for me. So, and you can see if we're just starting to make its way all the way back. See, we started at 310, already back to 305. So it's trying to hold 0.80 at altitude. Just a couple little tips and tricks on how to do that. Or if you want, you just go back to, and you can either push that, just use my thing here. I'll go back to speed manage mode. And let's take a look at our McDo here. We don't want to. All right, so we're supposed to be cruising at 390, so make sure, let's go ahead and put in 390, so we'll never make our cruise. And then performance, let's go performance, let's go climb. You see it's trying to hold 0.80 or 2. As we go into the next phase, cruise, this is where we can change some stuff. And remember I told you in descent, you can change what you like. I generally use, for the most part, 0.78, 300, basically what you see right here. But let's say you're running really behind schedule, and you can ask for a 0.80 slash, and let's go 340 in the transition. And then let's take a look. You see it over at our, let's see how much it changes for us. We're saying it's going to land at 1853. No, it's out of range. All right, 0.80 slash 320. Give me 320. There we go, 320. And we saved a minute by increasing our speed that way. So that's the other way. Instead of just doing everything through the cost index, if you would like to speed up your descent, you forget about doing the cost index. You've already taken off. You're like, ah, dang, I just looked at my performance numbers. It's showing us we're coming down, you know, in the ULCC model of super slow and super efficient, and I'm going too slow. Just type in that 0.80, 0.78, so generally kind of 0.78, 300, 0.80, 320 will kind of keep you in the mix. Here, obviously, as we begin to level out, what am I going to be kind of looking at right here? Well, we have a fairly large distance between the top of the V&E speed and the bottom of the like VLS, the stall speed. So we'll see where Coffin Corner ends up for us at this kind of weight. But I would probably, if I'm flying, I'm going to start accelerating as we level off here. But we got another 3,000 feet to go, so we'll see what that actually looks like. It is not uncommon for me, at least in the 321, as I'm cruising around 380, 390. And if I'm really heavy, that differential between the top where the V&E do not exceed speed, high speed issue, and we are going to stall low speed issue may only be 10 knots or so, and it can get real interesting in terms you start picking up a lot of turbulence. I'll have to start descending lower because I'm either going to stall or start over exceeding airspeeds and stuff like that. So it is a little bit unique. Some things that you're going to want to watch as you are flying. I don't really see it so much here in the sim. Like it's showing us what, 220 to 280, like 40 knot spread, 60 knot spread. I was in the Marines, sorry. It takes me a second. I don't have that many fingers and toes to count. All right, 38 climbing, 39. Which used to be 1,000 to go, which then got morphed in one taco, which apparently, when you do your check ride, they don't appreciate you saying one taco. All right, so as we come up here, I'm just going to let it do its thing. And what I'll go ahead and do is we're leveling off here. I'm just going to go ahead, once again, pull speed. And I get 0.84, probably can. It's good enough. So I'm going to set 0.84 as my speed. It'll go ahead and accelerate us a little bit. Let's take a look at our McDo. It was 52. How much does this help us? 51. So we picked up another 2 knots. So once again, I tell this to a lot of my FOs who are just trying to maximize the speed all the time. we are on a 2.5-hour flight, and you can see from going basically 0.80 to 0.84, the speed saving was literally 2 minutes. So what we can do, though, is we can, one last thing here before I cut you all loose before we start our arrival, is let's go back to the McDo. Let's come here. Normally, I'd probably do this on the ground because I would want to make sure all the numbers match up. I look through, but we're going to use 34 ILS 34 right, and we're going to do the ELAC. No transition. We are going to insert, and then let's go through the flight plan. We're level out here, not overspeeding, looks good. Let's go through the flight plan here, and a lot of times when you add in the arrival, you'll sometimes get a disco. So we're just going to pan through it. LCAP, that is actually the start of the arrival. Let's bring up our chart. So ELAP, and so we actually have some speed restrictions on here, so we'll see how well that does for us. Is there any altitude restrictions at ELAP? Probably not, but let's see what the bottom of this approach is. So we're going to fly all the way to the bottom. So I think, let's go, I think BBAG. Let's see, BBAG, go pole. Interesting. So it's going, let's see, how's it going to bring us over there? Go pole, and what's it's going to say? Nanux. So we have like the wrong chart up here. What is this chart for? Oh, yeah, we're in the wrong chart. So I'll have to pull up the right chart. But looks like ELAC, LCAB is the fix for that. So let's go ahead and just go direct to, if you ever get confused, hit flight plan. It'll bring you right back out to the very beginning. Let's go direct, so we can save some time to flight plan. It's like the older school. Direct. Goes through it that way. Works so many different LCAP. Direct to insert, confirm, insert. And we'll proceed direct on course to LCAB. And when we come back in, I'm going to let you go, guys, here. It's been probably a fairly long, laborious listening to me yippee yap this entire time. But what we're going to do here, I'll pull up the right approach, and then we'll go through that brief, and we will set the bottom altitude, and we'll have the computer basically do everything for us on the way in. All right. So once again, I will see you all in just a few seconds. All right, welcome back, everybody. We're getting ready to start our initial descent into Rome. So when do you want to actually start your briefing? Well, if we look at the McDo here, you see we're about 252 miles away. Once we get to 250, it should auto-tune the ILS for us. So that's generally kind of where we would wait until we start the brief, especially if you run into a couple of grumpy captains who will insist that's the way you do it. You can do it whenever you like. But the very first thing we're going to want to do, of course, is get our landing numbers just like we had our takeoff numbers. So why don't we go over to the E6B? It looks like it auto-populates everything for us as we're on the landing page. So all we're going to do is hit compute. And then that gives us our V approach 147, required landing distance. Doesn't give us our auto brakes there, but we will come over immediately to our panel. And we will put auto brakes. We will do low. How's that sound? And there we go. If you see right there at the top of our ND right there, you see the ILS 34 right, should auto tune for you right at that 250 nautical mile mark. All right, so what is the plan for us? We are going to do I actually have it now, the appropriate chart for the right runway. Now we're planning on doing this LCAB arrival. And so you see we're going to be entering here at LCAB, max 270 knots on the airspeed. And it's got some constraints for us. If we look down at the ND here, you can see that white dashed line. That's telling us when it thinks we should descend. So what we can do is we'll come up to our FCU. So if we go through all this here, and what you're going to want to do, and I'm not going to do it right on camera here, but you're literally going to want to take, I normally don't use my, I use my iPad, my personal iPad, and then I use my Navigraph charts, and it actually will do, it will actually show where we are. But I'll brief it through that way, because what you really want to do is go through all this stuff. So go pole at 21, is it 1900? So you can see go pole here on the chart is telling us 19 to 21. Here it's telling us it's going to hit it right at 19, and then Nanux is saying above 9,000, it's going to do 18.3 for us. And we're going to want to see what the bottom altitude is going to be. And you see the very bottom here is going to be Odula at 3,500 feet. So why don't we just dial in 3,500. I'm doing that off camera. 3,500. And we still have about another 40 miles to go. And then once we do that, we are going to roll it right into the ILS runway 34 right into Rome. We see we have 34 right on our ND. We have 34 right here on our approach chart. Localizer frequency 111.5 and a final approach course of 339. So if you look down at our PFD, we have nothing set. So we need to hit that LS button. And I'll make sure. I guess I could be doing this on my wind control stuff. So we see 11.95, right? So that is set. So double check there, right there. And our final approach fix, well, because it's Europe's got some weird bunch of numbers. It'd be 2,500 at this DME 7.88 FSS. Decision altitude is going to be 206 or 2 on the barrel. So what we can do here, we can come over to our ICDU, go over to our performance, next phase. And if you wanted, you could. So it doesn't look like it auto-populates anything here for us, but we can do that on our own here. And I'll probably end up doing that off camera. We wanted decision heights of 206. These are like, this is really the old school. And would be flaps full there. I'll put in our QNH. I think I'll do that later here. I just don't want to waste too much time here on that. And we'll come down. Just approach climb 339 cross D12 at 2,000 or above, then right turn to CMPV or climbing to 4,000. So 4,000 we are missed approach procedure. And then once we get down there, off of 3-4 right, it'll be a left-hand turn off there, probably around Delta Charlie, maybe all the way down towards Delta 8. So just left-hand turn off, that's what we want to know. And so at that stage, we are pretty much kind of briefed up. Like I said, I've got to just make sure I got to put in the, I'll look it up. It actually tells you here what the winds are. So we got 360 at 21, so don't judge me on my landing. I've actually never landed this. I've actually taken it off a couple times. And I just got to figure out what the QNH and the temp is. I can look that offline, off camera. We are coming up to the top of our descent here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to push in. You see the yellow dot right next to 3,500 lets us know we are going to be in descent mode. It's already started. All right, and then we can press here, and we'll go to speed managed. And these older ones give us a fairly large bracket there to hold speed. And if we are curious where we're kind of standing on the approach, because maybe I was doing a lot of yippity yapping, let's go back to our MICDO. And we go to the progress page, and you see we're 3,300 feet under center line. It's rapidly kind of catching up to us. So if we look once again at the ND there, at the 20-mile ring mark, you see that dashed kind of blue line. That's when it's going to tell us we're going to go into like thrust idle. So to make its target. Also, the magenta dot in front of LCAB, that's going to tell us when we begin to slow up to that 270 knot requirement at LCAB. All right, so you'll see that a lot at other spots on the arrival, but that's how you read your ND. So you're normally, let's get this out of the way. Normally you see we're coming down. I've got a descent, so descent 3,500, 1,000 feet per minute rate of descent until we hit that. Once again, here in about 15 miles or less, you're going to see it start to rapidly accelerate, or the descent rate. We're going to go into thrust idle, open descent, and it will keep us right on profile. Once again, we can come to our MICDO. You see it's starting to come in, and once the vertical deviation there gets to 0, then it's going to, let's go ahead and just randomly clear that out there, so we don't have anything in the scratch pad. And that's what we are doing now. Obviously, for this, because it's, this is the second video in this series, I have not gone through and made it ultra realistic for our thumbnail. I'm kind of going through, I'm just trying to give you the tools, what you should be briefing. And it's going to be, you're going to brief the approach. You're particularly looking for the bottom altitude of that star. Then you're going to brief the approach in terms of, you got the localizer frequency. And usually as I'm literally briefing, I'm like, localizer frequency of, what does that happen to be, 111.55 with the final approach course of whatever it's going to be, 340. That is set on the left, and that's just a visual reminder for me to make sure I push that LS button. And then I just want to wait here to make sure what we see here is, we should see as we're coming up on that dashed blue line, we should see it move into like an open descent and the descent rate. And you look right on our PFD, you see that magenta dot is coming down. That is our profile. Let's just know if we're also on profile. So you don't have to use the MICDO to see if you're on profile or not. You can actually just track that magenta ball. And as you see right now, it just says me talking. Now we're down to, it's accelerating to 2,000 feet per minute. And then thrust descent is going to be our call out on our FMAs. And if we were looking over at our engines, you will see they are pulling back on their own. So auto thrust is a wonderful, wonderful thing. All right, so from there, I think for the most part, I think I'll probably just kind of catch you outside. I will, I think, was that Jerry Springer, or is that, I forget who that was. The random thoughts that go through your mind, these kind of things that happen when you're actually flying. For the most part, as soon as we get in the aircraft, everyone's talking about the contract that we don't have and why it's taking so long. And then you have random idiotic conversations like this as you're flying around. What was I going to do? So I will probably meet up here as we're probably here. I'm going to think. Let's get into the approach. I will probably meet you up as we're probably kind of coming in off of Bunnell or Nyberg here, and we'll continue with the rest of the approach. So what you should see by that point is the aircraft is auto-configuring itself in terms of slowing down, not configuring, but it is managing the speed for us. We've got that max 220 at Bunnell, Nyberg 220, and 220, 220, 220, all the way until we make that turn there at RF 483. So, like I said, we're going to fly this aircraft a couple more times. Be on the lookout, of course, for the A320 teaching series, where we're going to go through these things very specifically in the most realistic manner possible. But as we went through kind of the flows and some of the appropriate checklists, this is kind of a first foray. It's hard to pack in a lifetime of knowledge into 2 like 40 to 50 minute flights. So I just want to give you some of the tools that you're going to want to use, that you're going to want to make your life a lot easier. And then as we get a little bit closer, I'll talk you through how we transition from the star into the approach and the actual kind of button pushing that we need to do and the call outs and all that kind of stuff. And the kind of the thought process, which involves, this is going to be very easy for us because it's calling all of our speeds. If we don't do anything, we'll show up at Odella around 200 knots. But for a lot of times, as we are flying with going into other airports and you're just going maybe direct to a fix, energy management is a really, really big deal. All right. So, and see, we're leveling off here at ECAB. We're at here. So, actually what it's doing is, you see it's pulling back on the speed. And so you can look at our PFD here as it's trying to hit that target speed of 270. What happens? Look at our descent rate, 300 feet per minute. And that is because when you're flying a big airplane like this, and even in the 320, you can either go down or slow down, but you're not going to do both. So that's why you really want to get yourself set up nice and early and take advantage of all the systems. And while you're doing it, this is what the computer wants to do. It may not always happen. So this is a time where, quite frankly, you're going to need to be prepared to get those speed brakes out. As I look right at it, right? These speed brakes, you're going to maybe have to use them. When I first started, I was like, oh, I don't want to have to use the speed brakes. If I'm using the speed brakes, haven't planned the approach right, man, that doesn't work in the Airbus. The Airbus will tell you everything's perfect up until the point it absolutely is not. So what we're going to do is, I know it's a lot of talking here, and I'm kind of going around here. We're going to leave the aircraft in its manage mode. Manage speed, manage altitude, and manage on the nav. All the way till we get into that downwind we were just talking about. Then I'll rejoin with you. We'll still keep the aircraft in manage mode, but then we're going to start doing a couple other things to get the aircraft prepared for the actual ILS approach into 3-4 right into Rome, where good luck to us all with the landing, since I've actually never landed the 340 before, ever. I've done I think 3 takeoffs as I've been configuring all my controls. So don't judge me too harshly, please. All right, so I will see you all in just a few seconds. All right, everybody, I am checking back in with you just a tad bit early, and the only reason I am doing that is I wanted to do the approach checklist. And when should you do that? As you're passing through 18,000 feet, you want to run the approach checklist. So the approach checklist is going to be seatbelt signs are on, and you can verify it there on the ECAM, or we simply, as I turn off, and seatbelt signs are on. Landing distance and weight are checked. We did that on the company EFB auto brakes. We have put that into the low position. Barrel ref is QNH 2982, and minimums is going to be DH 206. So that would be the approach checklist. As we're coming through here, you can see the aircraft's doing a really great job. In fact, if you are new to the Airbus, doing the approach in here to Rome, LIRF, man, really super easy. You don't have to do a whole lot of thinking. So as you're seeing, as we check in on the PFD here, now, when do we need to start bringing in our flaps? Well, as long as we're below the speed, and we don't have to memorize that. But what we have to absolutely do is, if we look at the airspeed tape there, you see that green dot at about 207 knots. You cannot get below green dot speed, or you should never get below green dot speed without flaps one in. You can go down to green dot speed, but below that, you need to have your flaps in. And what is green dot speed? It's effectively kind of your most aerodynamically efficient speed for the aircraft. So if I'm entering a hold, I'm going to slow it right down, especially if fuel's an issue. I'm going to slow it down to green dot speed, keep the flaps up. So I'd probably do like 210 in this instance, and that'll give me the max kind of range. So we are definitely well below the flaps 1 speed. So why don't we go ahead and call for flaps 1. So I'll just say flaps 1, and then my FO will say speed check, flaps 1, and he'll put it in. And now we have the flaps 1 is set. Now, this is a really easy approach for us. And what do I mean by that? As I keep forgetting I actually have the EFIS and the FCU here. Forgot what I was saying. So I know I was talking about how easy this aircraft is to fly on this actual approach. So when should we expect to have our next notch of flaps in? Well, if we look in right here, you can see for flaps 2, it's going to be 216, which is, if you look, do you see the speed tape there? You see that magenta dash equal sign? That is 216 knots. So when would you put in flaps 2? I think I mentioned this in video number 1, are going to be doing VFE minus 10. And the reason is if I put it in right now and then we had a wind gust, I could then theoretically exceed my flap speed. And what would that mean? That would mean an inspection. And I've had one of those. Not from that. I actually encountered a really, really bad wind shear event going into Minneapolis about 2 years ago. It was in the summer, and I was going in. I was right behind a United, and it was really weird because it was very clear, but right in front of me, about 5 miles in front of the airport, I can only describe it as like a supercell. I don't know what the technical definitions of it would be, but it probably went up to 60, 70,000 feet. Solid black. It was almost the entire horizon was black. United was going in. They gave me 3 runway changes, and so I was going in. And we're using flaps 3, which is flaps configuration 3 because it was a little bit gusty. But the wind was pretty much coming down the runway, runway heading. So it was going to be a headwind of about, it was 20, 30 something knot headwind, but gusting 35. So I was within the landing requirements, but it was really, really kind of getting gusty, and we're just kind of getting over we were under the lip, so it was super clear, but above us it was really pitch black, and straight in front of us was literally solid black. Like all you would see is like lightning going off in there. So I called up the tower and said, hey, if I have to do a missed approach, I absolutely cannot follow the missed approach procedure. It's going to take me right in that cell. And so they say, yeah, just basically do whatever you want. And so I was getting ready. I was getting set up at about 1,500 feet or so, and it was relatively low for the kind of the final approach fix. And I was just putting in like flaps 3, and I went and looked down at the PFD like I'm doing now, and I was looking at the wind, and I realized, which is in the top right of the ND there, and top left, I'm sorry, of the ND, and I realized I had like a 40 knot tailwind. And I'm like, wait, I've got a 40 knot tailwind, and I'm going to have like a 30 knot headwind. I'm like, oh, that's not going to work. And literally as I turned to my FIGO, said, we're going to need to go around. We got the wind shear really violently and immediately oversped the flaps, like instantaneously oversped the flaps. But now we got that, overspeed chime going off. So it's dee really loud. But what is the procedure when you're in wind shear? You need to hold your configuration. So now I'm like, well, man, what should I pull up the flaps? Should I not pull up the flaps? As I turn away from the wind shear, I might get another shear on the other side, and now I'm going to be low and slow. So I think I'm just going to eat the overspeed. All this is as I'm trying to fly it. As I'm trying to use my autopilot to make the turn, I'm just getting now closer and closer to the cell that's moving towards me. And I'm like, well, I can't do that anymore. So then I disengage the autopilot, and now I'm hand flying it so I can increase that angle of bank so I can really get out of the way. Meanwhile, that thing is just beeping at me consistently, and I'm trying to judge, okay, am I out of the wind shear? Because I don't want to end up, I need to climb, so I'm doing that. But if I get in that wind shear and I lose that because I was gaining 70 knots, what if I go negative 70 and I'm already kind of slow to begin with because I'm already kind of in the flaps 3 configuration. I think it's 2 going into 3. So I ended up riding it out, but I ended up overspeeding the flaps by, I'm going to say like 30 miles an hour, 25 knots, something like that. So diverted back to Chicago O'Hare, which is, I hate that airport, literally hate it. And They had to come out and do a big inspection on it. Ended up flying back that night. We made it back, but it was pretty intense. All right, so what are we doing right now? Well, we're still staying in our managed mode. But that is because at the very bottom of the approach, normally I would already be pulling speed and doing my own thing here, but you can see we need to be at 200 knots when we get to Odula. So I've got a couple things I could possibly do. I could just start slowing up now, which is a legit thing to do, and then activating my approach. If I come down here and we go into performance, we need to activate that approach. But if I activate that approach right now, because I am in speed managed, the aircraft's going to start pulling itself all the way back to approach speed. So probably what the best thing to do is here, I'm going to go ahead and pull speed. I'm going to start slowing down to 210 or 200. And that way I don't have to worry about having any exceedances. In terms of airspeed, I can come down to back to my McDo. We want to activate that approach. Confirm. Yep, we're activated. Excellent. We should be starting our right-hand turn here in just a second. As we look at our PFD, you see, let me get rid of this for a second. I'm now VFE minus 10. So let's go ahead and do flaps 2. So speed checks. Flaps 2. And now we're really, really well configured. This is something I have to stress, even to my newer FOs, is about speed management. We don't want to be going in once remember I told you, slow down or get down. Well, we've already taken our, the biggest thing we've done is we've got some of our drags out of, which is we're in flaps 2. The next thing we're going to do after flaps 2 is we're going to put gear down. All right. So we're just kind of coming all the way around here. And if we look at our PFD, you zoom in here on the PFD side, you see that a magenta diamond? That is the ILS glide slope. Now, we want to be underneath that when we try to engage the approach. So we should be good here. It's just going to probably keep us underneath there. Now, what are we going to want to do at this point? Well, we're going to want to engage the localizer, the autopilot 1 and 2 loc. But for now, we're just going to stay on the RNAV. We're still pretty far out if we look on our chart. We still have a ways to go. And if you look at the PFD down there, one more time here, let's get rid of that. You see that it's not magenta, the orange dash on the speed tape, the equal sign. So we're about 3 or so knots. We could put in flaps 3 right now if we needed to. I won't, because the normal procedure will be flaps 2. I'm sorry, gear down after flaps 2, then flaps 3. So as we're kind of coming around the corner here and getting ourselves on to final, what we want to see as we look at the PFD, we want to see that we are under the magenta diamond, because you cannot, the glide slope will not activate from above. If we're above that magenta diamond is below us, I now then need to descend. There's a whole procedure how to do that. It makes your life a lot more difficult. So we're going to try not to do that. And we're still continuing to descend, so we should be getting low down to at least 3,500 or so by Odula. So bring our chart back up here. That's where we want to be. And then from there, just go ahead and bring up our approach chart. And we're coming in from Odula there. Our approach fix will be 7.8 DME out at 2,500, but we'll gauge the approach. 339 on the heading. Let's leave that up for now. And we're still looking good. About 5,000 feet, so we're getting a little bit closer. But we're going to let the aircraft do all the work if we can. So a general rule of thumb is around 2,500 feet. You know what I'm going to want to be? I want be around probably about 180. Now, these are 321 numbers, but it looks like it's going to work for us pretty good. And I'm going to want to be around 185 knots or so. The reason is I want to be immediately able to go into flaps 3 when I drop the gear and I manage my speed. And that's about the same here. We can go ahead and zoom in here a little bit more. And usually at some point you're going to be cleared for the approach. What you can do here is we could pull heading 339 or so roughly. And then when you want to engage the approach, we're going to put LOC on autopilot. Well, it gives us 1 and 2. That's interesting. All right. So in the Airbus, you put on both approaches. That way you could do a Cat 2 or Cat 3. So this aircraft may just not be capable of it. That's why we don't have that sticker on there. All right. So coming up, and we're seeing the top of descent here in a little bit. So I'm going to start slowing down just a little bit more. What am I looking to have? I want to be at 1,000 feet above airport elevation. I want to be fully configured. We call it the stabilized approach concept. It means we're beyond glide slope on vertical and lateral deviation. Within that, we're going to be within one dot and on speed. So I'm just going to Alt Star. I'm going to go ahead and hold what we got now until we see the PFD here. As it starts to come down, let's get rid of that. Now this is a little bit on the early side, but what we can do is we can drop our gear. Need arm the approach. That'll help. Cat 3 single. Glide slope star. We did that just in the nick of time. I'm just going to ride that for now. Manually slow down a little bit more. It really threw me off as flying the localizer in. That threw me off not being able to have autopilot 1 and 2 on. So I was dealing with that, so it should have been, I should just put the approach straight on, but saved it in the nick of time because I'm a professional. All right, coming up on about 3,000 feet. Once again, this is a bit early. I'd probably wait a tad bit because we've already got our speed already taken care of, but let's go ahead and press in on speed, which will give us speed managed. And then let's go flaps 3, and then we'll go speed checks. Flaps 3. And we used 15 knots on the last notch of flaps. Once again, probably doesn't matter for us, but once again, we're looking really good here. And we will go call for flap full, speed checks, flaps full. At this point, we are set. The only thing I just realized is we don't have the autopilot disconnect button probably mapped to anything. I'll see if it works on my controller, but well, not sure here. We might have to knock out the autopilot here a little bit early. Other than that, we are set. All right, so cabin signs, spoilers. Oh, remember, whenever, because I'm busy yippity-yap talking, whenever you touch the gear, you need to do something with the spoilers. Go to the overhead panel just so we get rid of that. Cursor should take care of that. And let's run the approach checklist. And the approach checklist is going to be, I'm sorry, the landing checklist will be cabin signal was given. My FO would, or pilot monitor would say, flight attendants, please prepare for landing. Landing distance, or auto thrust, speed, landing gear, down and 3 green. ECAM memo, landing, no blue. All right, so we are cleared to land. coming down right on the ILS. Perfect. Nice and easy.
Traffic.
Funny, I forgot to arm the approach. Usually you just arm the approach and then hit autopilot 1 and 2. For lights, because I'm busy talking around, normally what we do for here, we put whenever you're clear for the approach, I'll put my turn off lights on. Once again, I'm busy yippee-yap talking. I have none of my lights on. So we'll have to take care of that next time I do that, less talking. All right, coming up on 700 feet. Let's see, will this disengage the autopilot? It will not. So let me come over here and press the autopilot disconnect.
500.
Once again, autopilot disconnect.
400. 300. 100 above.
Well, that is interesting. So it's not letting me disconnect. In fact, it is locked in here.
200. Minimum. 100. 50. 40. 30. 20. 10. 5.
All right, and spoilers. So that was interesting for me. So I'm using I apologize everyone, I'm actually using my yoke, was that the Moza ABY whatever, and it would not. There we go. See, now it's letting me disconnect. Bizarre. I could not actually get that to disconnect on the way in. Guess I could have taken the autopilot off that way, but that's not how you do that. And after landing, I'll go ahead and put in the spoilers. The FO will bring up the flaps. We'll cycle through. And on. And then I will turn off the landing and just go back to taxi. And then taxi in. All right, folks, I'll probably just leave it right here because I know this has been going long. I am a bit concerned why I could not get the autopilot to disconnect by hitting the autopilot disconnect button and or the autopilot disconnect on my yoke. So I'll work that out. It's not a big deal. I'm sure we can figure that out. It's also dark as hell in here. Anyways, once again, hope you enjoyed this flight. We try to run this as much as, wait, I put my parking brake on so I don't have to ride the brakes. I hope you enjoyed this flight. We're going to be flying this aircraft more. Be on the lookout for the A320 teaching series as I go through all these procedures in more in depth. The next time we fly this aircraft as well, we will be using same tensions, and I'll just be kind of going through, now that we have a base level of knowledge, some of the flows and checklists, and doing everything as realistic as possible so I can get that insane realism on my thumbnail. So anyways, everyone, once again, thanks for all the support. Please like, subscribe, and comment if you found some value to this, and I will catch you all in the next one. Take care for now.